Hello guys, how are you?
I'm Hardeep Singh. Welcome back to your own YouTube channel. IELTS updates and recent exams. For more updates related to recent IELTS exam writing test topics, listening, reading, practice test, and speaking, you got guesswork. Please, guys, participate in everyday listening and reading practice test to achieve your desired band score in your actual IELTS exam. Please hit the like and subscribe button. Press the bell icon for the upcoming notifications. Don't forget like, subscribe and share my YouTube channel and my Facebook page, IELTS updates and recent exams.
Part 1.
You will hear a lecturer talking about food preservation.
First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5.
In today's lecture, I'd like to look at the topic of food preservation and start by asking the obvious question, why do we need to preserve food? Well, apart from keeping it fresh for our daily needs, many foods, such as fruit and vegetables, are only available at certain times of the year. So if we want to be able to eat these foods all year round, we need to preserve them. We also need to preserve food for export overseas, to make sure that it doesn't perish in transit. And lastly, we need to be able to preserve food for when there are food shortages. There are a number of methods of preserving food which involve both high and low temperatures, chemicals, irradiation, and drying. Let's have a look at these in turn. In the 1870s, the French scientist Louis Pasteur showed that microorganisms in food could be destroyed by raising the temperature of the food, a process now known as pasteurization. This involves heating milk to just 65 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes. A new method, the ultra-high temperature, or UHT process, involves heating milk to 150 degrees Celsius for 3 seconds. The advantage of treating milk in this way is that it lasts much longer, though I tend to feel, and I'm sure many of you would agree, that taste is somewhat sacrificed in the UHT process. Tin cans were first used in the early 1800s to store and preserve food. Just as they are now, the cans were tin-plated steel containers, and the process had the advantage of being cost-effective. Unfortunately, however, there were many early cases of food poisoning because the canning process was not fully understood at that stage. We now know the exact temperature and length of time each food needs for proper preservation, which has greatly reduced the risk of food poisoning. People living in cold climates often preserve food by burying it in the snow, and the Romans knew all about the advantages of packing food in ice. But for most people, this was not an option until the invention of the refrigerator in 1834. Today, however, refrigeration is the most important means of preserving food because the food stays fresh without needing to be treated. However, refrigeration requires an electricity supply, and unfortunately, if the power goes off, so does the food.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
A variety of chemicals can be added to food, and you'll find their names listed on the labels of cans and bottles. Salt is probably the oldest of all the chemical preservatives and was used by many ancient civilizations for many years. Sugar also acts as a preservative and is used to preserve jams in much the same way that vinegar is used to pickle foods. Chemical preservatives are effective, but they do not suit all foods, and the processes involved are time-consuming. Another method of preserving food is by drying it. Most foods are 75% to 90% water, so if you remove the water, the microorganisms simply can't survive. When food is dried, it not only lasts a long time, but it also becomes much lighter, which is a big advantage, as this makes it cheap to store. Though some people argue that valuable nutrients are lost in the process. Early methods for drying food involved cutting it into strips and hanging it in the sun or over fires. But there are now a number of more modern methods which involve the use of recent technology. One of these is known as roller drying, and it's a highly effective way of making dried foods from liquids, such as soup. Have a look at this diagram to see how it works. Well, first of all, the hot soup is poured in at one end here. The liquid spreads to form a thin layer on a heated belt. The liquid dries as it moves along. By the time it reaches the end of the belt, all the water has evaporated, leaving only dry powder. A blade then scrapes the dried material off the roller and captures it in powder form. All you have to do is add boiling water, and you have your hot soup back again, ready to drink. Another method is called freeze drying, and for those of you who still remember...
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
You'll hear a tutor and 3 students discussing their work.
First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 17. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 17.
Good morning everyone. Well, in today's tutorial we're going to discuss the essays that you have to submit by the end of next week. Some of you will have already started them, which is good, and if you haven't, well, that's okay, but you'll have to get a move on. So, let's begin with you, Simon. What's happening with you?
Well, I've made a start on it. I researched the background quite extensively last weekend, and I should get to the writing stage tomorrow with a bit of luck, and I'll get finished at the weekend.
What are you writing about?
I decided to look at the car manufacturing company Jaguar, examine the problems they had with reliability in the 1970s and 80s, how they dealt with it, and how it affected their marketing and sales strategy.
That sounds pretty interesting. Any problems with that?
At the start I had problems getting information from that far back, but after rooting around in the library I found some magazines which gave me information and also gave me references to find other stuff. It seems now the only problem is keeping to the 4,000 word limit. It just seems that I have so much to write about. It seems I'll need 5,000 or even 6,000 words to be able to cope.
Yes, your essay title seems to me to be very wide-ranging. Would you think about cutting out part of it? How about looking at their sales and marketing strategy, but only mentioning the problems in the 70s and 80s and not going too far into it?
That's a good idea. That will make it much easier to handle. By the way, how do you want us to hand in our work? Do you want us to drop in a hard copy to your office?
You could do that, but I'd prefer it if you just emailed it to me as an attachment. You've all got my address. If not, give it to the secretary, clearly marked that it's for me. Right, Jennifer, how about you?
I've not really got going on it yet, but I have decided on a subject. I'll try and do some research during the rest of this week, and I should get writing this weekend.
Okay, what are you writing about then?
I want to look into how supermarkets use market surveys to develop their products.
Will you have enough time to find out what sort of things that the supermarkets do? You won't have much time for that.
I should be okay. I've had a look in the stack system in the library, and I found a magazine that surveyed all the UK major supermarkets and a trade publication that analysed the same things in Canadian supermarkets.
Be careful about using their conclusions too much. The university takes a tough stance on plagiarism. Make sure you properly list where you get your information from in a bibliography and try and do your own analysis. Get going too, as that analysis will take a bit of time.
Okay, thanks.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 18 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 18 to 20.
And Melanie, how is your work going?
I'm a bit behind, I'm afraid. I was sick all last week and the weekend with flu. I've got a subject, I think, but I've not done any work on it yet. Is there any chance I can get an extension to the submittal date?
The policy of the department is not to give any extensions unless there are extenuating circumstances. Do you have a doctor's certificate or anything?
I went to the doctor's, but I didn't get a note as I didn't realise I would need it. The doctor will have a record of me, though, as I got a prescription. I'll go back and get one.
Yes, do. If you get one, then there shouldn't be a problem getting an extension. Without it, though, you'll be in trouble. What subject are you considering, anyway?
I thought I'd do an overview of the UK mortgage interest rates and their effect on housing sales trends over the last 10 years. I thought it might be of interest because of the huge increases of house prices over the last decade.
Certainly an interesting subject, and it should be no great problem getting information, as this has been fairly well documented. It's a lot of work again, though, and you'll really need to get cracking on it, even with the extension, if you get one.
Well, I've not got much on for the rest of the week, and I've set aside the weekend to really get to grips with it.
Good. Now, is there anything else?
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
You will hear a woman who is going to be interviewed for a scholarship talking to a man who previously received one. Before you listen, you have 30 seconds to read questions 21 to 27.
Hi, Vibol. Thanks for coming.
No problem, Sophie. I hope I can help. When's the interview?
On Thursday.
Which course do you want to do?
A Master's in Development Studies.
Whereabouts?
In Australia. Melbourne, actually.
Well, Melbourne's a great place. I visited in my semester break.
But you studied in Adelaide, didn't you?
Yeah.
Why Adelaide?
I heard before I applied for the scholarship that most applicants want to go to Sydney or Melbourne. So by choosing Adelaide, I thought I'd have a better chance.
Do you think I should go to Adelaide? Or not do development studies?
I think the key is to choose a course you're really interested in, no matter where it is.
Why's that?
because the workload is heavy. My master's was probably the most difficult thing I've done in my whole life.
I see. Anyway, I bet the interview panel asks the same questions every year. What did they ask you?
Firstly, about why I wanted to go to Australia.
What did you say?
I told them I'd been there already, and I liked it.
What else did the panel ask?
About my undergraduate degree, about my job, about how a master's would improve my performance, and the performance of my organization.
Where are you working now?
Oh, and they asked about my family, whether I'd take my wife with me.
Well, I'm single and planning to stay that way. As to the courses helping me at work, you know I quit my regular job working in the university library.
Yeah, I heard that. What are you doing now?
I'm a volunteer at a rehabilitation center.
However do you survive financially?
I teach English at night, and I live cheaply.
Good for you. You could say an MA would improve your prospects of finding permanent work.
I wonder what the interview panel will think about my undergraduate degree. It's in Russian and history. I studied Russian so I could get a scholarship to Russia for a master's degree, but I only lasted 6 months in Europe.
If I were you, I wouldn't mention you already have an incomplete master's. I'd focus on the work you're doing now. Use phrases like grassroots activism and capacity building. The panel will love that.
Oh? I do worry about my background. My family comes from a village on the coast. I seem to recall that most people who were awarded scholarships in the last 3 years came from big cities and were socially successful.
In the past, that was true. Indeed, all the interviews were held here in the capital. But this year, they're also taking place in the provinces, so scholarships will go to a more diverse group of people. I don't think you should beg for assistance, Sophie. But you don't need to hide your background either. Be proud of it.
I am proud of it.
After all, it means you can empathize with the people you volunteer for. However, when you come back with a master's degree, you'll be able to mix with more influential people. I mean politically influential. I'd emphasize that if I were you.
I'm not sure the selectors will want to know about my politics, but they may want to see that I'm passionate about development.
Before you listen to the rest of the conversation, you have 30 seconds to read questions 28 to 30.
By the way, Vibol, in Adelaide, what did you do your master's in?
Taxation law.
And what are you doing now?
I set up a restaurant.
A restaurant? With a master's in taxation law?
Taxation is a nightmare here. To be honest, Sophie, I just want an easy life.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
You will hear a lecture on the disposal of electronic or e-waste. Before you listen, read questions 31 to 40.
Normally in this class, we design and evaluate apps, and we'll get back to that tomorrow. This afternoon, I'd like to raise your awareness about the issue of electronic waste disposal. As some of you know, I've got twin daughters who turn 13 on Tuesday. Like many children their age, they're totally in love with electronic devices. My husband gave his old smartphone to one of them, and I was forced to give my newish phone to the other. That was 2 years ago. Now they're both demanding brand new smartphones of their own. An anxious parent, I would have given in to this demand had I not just read an article about e-waste. Let me add that I read part of it on my tablet at home, the rest on my desktop computer at work, and afterwards I counted how many electronic items my family and I have at home, at school, and at work. And we've got 24. Yup, 24. An average American family, no doubt. Anyway, I finally agreed to birthday phones for my girls on condition that my husband and I shed some of our own devices as responsibly as we could. In the past, we've just put them out in the garbage as though they were banana peel or broken plates. This time, I decided to take 2 laptops and my girls' phones to a recycler accredited by the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. I found an interactive map on the EPA website showing companies that sign up to recycling schemes called e-Stewards and Responsible Recycling Practices. It's easy enough to drop stuff off at these companies and receive cash in return. I do regret to say that in the U.S., the cash return is tiny because there are currently insufficient volumes of electronic trash for these companies to turn into treasure. Since I'd like to encourage this recycling practice among my students and colleagues, there's a web link on my Facebook page. Frankly, I don't think Americans recycle enough. Yet, even with these companies that have popped up recently, there's still a huge problem. I mean, the collection of the e-waste is fine, but who knows how it's processed? The EPA believes that only 20% is actually recycled, and the rest is incinerated or put in landfill. The auditing of this process has yet to begin. The majority of local e-waste, around 8 million metric tons a year, is sent off abroad, mostly to Asia or Africa, where health and safety regulations scarcely exist. One reason the U.S. still banishes most of its e-waste is because it refused to sign the 1989 Basel Convention that controls the export of hazardous waste from rich countries to poorer ones. Needless to say, it wasn't the only rich country to spurn the convention. Neither Canada nor Japan consented to a 1995 amendment banning such trade completely. However, European signatories to the Basel Convention may not, in reality, behave any better. Inspections at ports in Germany and the Netherlands have proven that e-waste, like much other cargo, is deliberately mislabeled so it passes unnoticed through customs. So what's inside e-waste, and who deals with most of it? Well, the list of chemicals is very long indeed. An average smartphone contains around 60 different chemical elements. Heavy metals, like lead and mercury, exist alongside arsenic, beryllium, cadmium, and polyvinyl chloride, all toxic to humans in quite small amounts. When electronics are incinerated, unless at extremely high temperatures, many more toxins are produced, including halogenated dioxins and furans, which seriously contaminate the food chain. India and China are 2 major processors of e-waste. At present, the city of Guiyou in Guangdong Province in China is considered the world's e-waste capital. American, Japanese, and European containers loaded with e-waste arrive in Guiyou hourly. But these days, there's also considerable waste from the rest of China itself. The EPA estimates that by 2020, 100 million metric tons of e-waste will be produced globally each year, and of that, only an infinitesimal amount will see its way back into more electronic products. So, designing apps for this digital age is important. As an extra assignment, I'd like those of you who are interested to create one that lets users responsibly end the lives of their many electronic devices.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
So guys, don't forget like, subscribe and share my YouTube channel and my Facebook page, IELTS updates and recent exams. For more updates related to recent IELTS exam writing test topics, listening, reading, practice test and speaking, you got guesswork. Please guys, participate in everyday new IELTS listening and reading practice tests to achieve your desired band score in your actual IELTS exam. For more IELTS material, visit my official website www.ieltsupdatesandrecentexams.com. The link is given below in the description. If you need PDF files of latest IELTS material, then please join my Telegram channel. So guys, please write your score below the comment section. Again, thanks for listening. God bless you all guys. Stay tuned, stay safe.